Good evening, everyone, and I'd like to welcome you once again to the NEETwork, the new podcast for all things NEET. I am Theo, and with me, as always, is my good friend Dexter.
Hello, everybody.
How is your NEET life going, Dexter?
Well, it's not. Unfortunately, I am caged to the wage, and it's been a rather rough couple of weeks in the wage cage.
Yeah, you were telling me a little earlier about how your wage cage in particular was getting kind of wild. Do you want to give everyone the Cliff's Notes version? You don't have to give us the whole thing, just
Yeah, so it's the traditional story of poor management leads to stress among the employees, which leads to employees leaving, which leads to employees having to take on additional responsibilities, which leads to more stress, which creates a very vicious cycle. We're currently trying to stabilize that, but it's hard to say if it's working. It looks bleak.
oof. Yeah, I mean, my NEET life is going pretty similarly. I'm just working on my escape, and I'm hoping to make that escape in about a year, or at least make the first really big step in about a year.
How's the cage treating you?
It's honestly, it's not terrible. They pay me pretty good, and I only work part-time, so I'm not exhausted at the end of the day.
That's not too bad.
Yeah. But in NEET news related to the subject of the evening, we are going to talk about Gamestop finally. And what's been going on with Gamestop? If you're not familiar with this kind of thing, it can be a bit difficult to explain. But what has been discovered about GameStop is a number of very large companies. To use the word company is not quite accurate. They literally just make money. They don't do anything. They don't have a product. They just make money as a corporation.
They're one of those companies that literally all they do is play the market.
Exactly. And what they've been doing with GameStop and a number of other corporations, a number of other stocks, is borrowing the stock and then making money when the stock goes down in price. And don't ask me how that's supposed to work.
I can try to take a crack at it. I'm not a financial expert, but effectively, a lot of these hedge fund companies have just stupid sums of money that are available to them. They're just large groups of people who pool money together.
Yeah.
And what they'll do is they'll target these failing businesses. In this case, they're targeting GameStop, which was consistently going down.
Mm-hmm.
And what they do is they would borrow a stock from somebody and sell it to someone else because at the time that they sold it, there was a trend that the value of the stock was going down.
Uh-huh.
So as the price is going down, they borrow it and sell it at the higher price, and then at a later date, buy it back at the supposed lower price, and then give that borrowed stock back to whomever they borrowed it from. And then they skim off the side however much money they make.
Oh, that sounds so convoluted.
A lot of times it really works for them. They make stupid money off of it.
Oh, yeah.
When you have $1 billion to throw at this, you're going to make another $1 billion. Like $1 each time you do it, but it adds up if you have enough to do it. That's how these companies make their money.
Okay.
Unfortunately, with the GME case, some financial experts from Reddit and /biz were able to notice there was a trend that a certain hedge fund was following, and that this trend tends to interact with these types of businesses in the market.
Mm-hmm.
It always happens with these failing businesses. And this one was doing something very similar. So what they did is they basically published their findings saying that they believe this hedge fund is purchasing short squeezes.
Yeah, they're shorting the stock.
Yeah, they're shorting the stock. Yeah, this is a really dangerous place for these hedge funds to be. It puts them in a really vulnerable state because another hedge fund could jump in and put them out of business if they wanted to.
Right.
In this case, the other hedge fund happened to be the recreational market or the retail market.
And the hope is that all of these retail investors are buying up stock in the hope that the hedge fund companies will eventually cover their stock, which will cause the GME price to shoot up. And this has been a kind of ongoing thing for a few months, and it's still ongoing, but I would call a recent development that a mainstream media finance shill named Jim Cramer, who's been on the side of the hedge fund companies this whole time, has essentially caved and said the hedge funds at this point have no choice but to cover their shorts just because the retail investors are so stubborn and holding on to GameStop. But since this whole fiasco has started, it's pretty much been a roller coaster. GameStop shot up to 450 and then dropped down to, I can't remember. Was it 50 or so? It dropped pretty damn far, and then shot back up to 200, and then dropped down to 150, and then shot back up again. And I expect that to happen a few more times. And as a result of this, people are making pretty much life-changing amounts of money just buying and selling the GameStop stock. And that is the subject of tonight's discussion. I kept delaying this episode and I kept flirting with it, but tonight we're finally going to talk about NEETbux and how to get your NEETbux. Before we get into the meat of the episode, we're going to have to make the disclaimer that we are in no way qualified to give financial advice, and any financial decision you make should be made with great care, and extensive research should be put into any course of action regarding your finances.
If you don't do it yourself, I would really recommend finding a top-notch financial advisor or an accountant of some kind that can assist you. Especially if you want to live the neat life, money is not something you should toy around.
Yes, and furthermore, in your attempts to secure NEETbux, we do not and will never encourage the commission of crimes such as fraud. This podcast is meant to inform people of the resources available to them, and any action you take as a result of listening to this podcast is your personal responsibility.
Remember, everyone, crime is never comfy.
It certainly isn't. And I think before we get to the subject of how to make money, I think a good place to start would actually be figuring out how to live within your means to start with. And a lot of people think about making more money when they think about how they support themselves, but it's not as common that people think about how to spend less money.
It's kind of going back to that, I think it's episode 2, the not quite to the degree of Diogenes, but, this kid's drinking water with his hands. I don't need my bowl anymore kind of situation.
Right. And we did talk about rejection of consumerism and embracing minimalism a while ago. And I find that in the times of my life when I take on these philosophies, I really was spending less money. And it makes sense when you're living a lifestyle whose core tenet is just acquiring less stuff. You're going to spend less money.
I mean, I would say I'm arguably living that lifestyle right now. Fresh out of college, I still have a lot of my college sensibilities. I don't have any money, I don't eat kind of situations, and everything else is so expensive. I mean, you lived in the house with me for, I would say, close to 3 or 4 weeks during college. I literally did nothing but ate bread and eggs.
Yeah, and learning how to spend less money on food is a great way to, uh, I'm just going to say cut costs.
Now that I'm outside of college and I actually have a job, I actually have a little bit of money coming in. I have a little bit of extra spending cash. I don't really spend it on much. Like, I might get a luxury here and there for myself,
Yeah.
but it really do limit my funds, and I would recommend tracking what you're spending as a way to kind of visualize it. It's amazing how much a lot of things can stack up.
Right, they call that the Starbucks effect, where someone who drinks a cup of Starbucks coffee every day can save hundreds of dollars simply because they're not spending $5 a day on coffee.
Right, I've heard of that. And actually, this is kind of funny. A lot of arcades will see what machines people are flocking to the most,
Hmm.
and they will put more of those machines in their shops.
Is there an arcade where you live?
There is one in the town over.
Okay. We kind of have an arcade, but it's a bowling alley first, and there are also video games there.
Arcades typically don't cost a lot up front, but they cost like a lot to maintain. So of course they're pulling in a bunch of money somewhere.
Well, on the subject of video games, there are some quite expensive hobbies that a lot of people could do just to cut out of their life. I remember I played Warhammer quite a while ago, and yeah, spent quite a bit of money on that, not just on the figures, but on everything that came with it. Things like Warhammer might be out of your price range. Right now, what I do is I play the saxophone, and while my saxophone was expensive to start, I had that high upfront cost, but now I can play it whenever I like for basically free.
Plus, you really can't overlook that potential to make money in the future off the saxophone, if you get good enough at it.
I guess in addition to hobbies, there's all of those monthly subscription entertainment services like Netflix and Disney Plus. I recall seeing a list on the internet somewhere of a guy who had compiled a list of all of the things, all of the monthly subscriptions he had, and yeah, Netflix, Disney Plus, Hulu, Amazon Prime, and all of that. And it totaled out to like $1,200 a month, and most of those services he had, I hadn't even heard of.
I think that's the monthly money challenge, something like that. I can't remember. I
Maybe.
remember seeing something about it somewhere, but basically it's they take all of their monthly costs based off of like subscriptions, consistent monthly costs,
Interesting.
and they add them all together on like a giant list. This is like something that you would maybe consider keeping in like a personal Excel sheet at home to track. Like, wow, I can't believe I'm spending this much money. Sure, I'm only spending say $10 on each subscription maybe.
But I have 10 subscriptions.
Now I'm spending $100, which is a tenth of my paycheck on just monthly subscriptions, and that should really be the smallest portion of my where I spend my paycheck, right?
Right.
That's kind of that Starbucks spending.
And really, there's tons of entertainment out there for free if you know where to look. For instance, I haven't bought music in years because of YouTube. I if I want to hear a song, I can probably find any song ever made on YouTube.
Now that's a little tricky because though yes, YouTube is free, you have to consider the abstract cost to it, which is your internet fee, which at least in America is like one of the bigger monthly costs.
Well, if you're a NEET, you probably want pretty good internet anyway.
So this is one of those non-negotiable neat funds.
I would say to be comfy in the modern day, a good internet connection is necessary.
But of course that's subjective. And of course internet can go to other things as well. It's not limited to just leisure. The internet is a good way to make a lot of those passive funds, such as playing the stock market, for example.
Exactly. The internet is a resource and a source of comfort. Moving right along, that's all the points I have about frugal living that I can think of. What about you, Dexter?
Uh, I think that about sums it up, limiting your cost while maximizing the gains from the few expenses you do have. But on the opposite end, some of the least efficient with their money is the government, which the government is a great way for a lot of needs. The government's a great way for a lot of needs to kind of take off. And I know you've mentioned this in the past, how many needs live off of things like Social Security or disability. You want to go in depth on that?
Well, I'm not gonna lie. I'm not sure if there's a difference between Social Security and disability. I think they might be two different things, or it just might be what some people call. I think it's just like two different terms for the same system. But it does seem to me like a lot of NEETs live on some form of government funding that allows them to not work. It's not usually a lot. It might not necessarily be a living wage depending on where you live, depending on your location. Things like certain physical or mental disabilities can qualify you for Social Security, as well as just being a senior citizen.
I know right now both my mom and my dad qualify for Social Security because I believe they're above the age of, and I think my dad qualified for it prior because he has some pretty limiting medical situations, but that might even just be disability.
I have looked into getting disability for myself. I was gonna try and claim that I was like very, very badly depressed, but I don't qualify for a number of reasons. And I would think like most people who think to go for it also disqualify for some reason. In fact, I've heard of people who even qualify for disability or social security getting rejected for just some dumb reason.
But have you ever tried for video game addiction?
Ooh. Is it considered a legal disability yet? Video game addiction?
I believe the WHO has qualified it as an actual addiction.
That is the World Health Organization, not the Who, the band. Interesting. I'll have to try again. I think one of the things was I have too much in the way of liquid assets. They want you to be like below a certain, I guess, wealth limit before they'll start considering you for Social Security. That said, even if you don't qualify for Social Security, I'd still encourage you to apply for it anyway. And like, what's the worst that can happen? They just say no.
Who knows? The government's even so inefficient that they might approve you.
Yeah, there's a possibility.
Why not give it a try?
Yeah.
I mean, they're not going to charge you against it.
Yeah, exactly. But as far as government assistance goes, something easier that I've found to qualify for is food stamps, and I applied for an EBT card, and I it just arrived in the mail. When I wrote the show notes, I said I'm waiting for it to arrive in the mail, but it actually got here yesterday. And even with the small amount of money that my EBT card grants me, as a singular guy with no one else to feed, the money it grants me can let me survive. Like, I can live off of that food every month if I spend the money right.
Right. I mean, if you live frugally, use your EBT card, on things like eggs and rice, which go a long way typically. Yeah, staple foods, you can probably get pretty far with just that.
And that's all the government assistant type things I can think of. But there is one more form of money that has to do with the government, and this isn't the government giving you money. This is often the opposite. It's something that is said everyone has to deal with, and that is taxes.
Man, I freaking hate taxes.
Who likes taxes except for politicians? Am I right?
That's for sure. They really like my money when it's going to them.
Right. The saving grace is most of the time, if you make below a certain amount of money every year, you don't pay taxes. You still need to do taxes, but you'll likely get a tax return and basically make money if you know what you're doing. I don't think I've ever paid taxes because I've never made enough money.
That sounds like a lifesaver for NEETs who, generally speaking, don't make a exorbitant amount of money.
Well, the tax return itself is never a huge amount of money. It usually ranges from about 1 to 2 grand, but it is a nice shot in the arm. I've known a couple guys who essentially didn't know how to do taxes, and my mother helped them out. And yeah, that tax return essentially allowed them to get on their feet and kind of escape some bad situations they were living in. But also, let's just say there's a good chance that you disagree with the things your government is doing with your tax dollars, and you don't want to contribute money toward those ends. If you're not paying taxes, your money isn't being contributed to those things. But as a single guy, or a single person, I should say, there are actually quite a few female NEETs. If you're single, living on this level of income is pretty easy. But if you have dependents, it's a little more complicated. I would encourage you, if you have dependents, not to be a NEET unless you can really manage it.
Don't be a deadbeat.
Yeah, don't be a deadbeat dad or mom.
I'm not gonna say you've excluded yourself from NEETdom, but
You're certainly not doing yourself any favors.
you've hampered. your potential there.
Right. But on the subject of family, that is a pretty common way for single NEETs, not the kind with dependents, to essentially live out their NEETdom. Some families are willing to support a member to various extents. Usually, this is a parent to child support.
Currently, personally, I live with my parents. I believe you live with yours too, Theo.
Right. I rent a room from my mother and my stepfather.
Thing about my situation is I don't pay rent as long as I am actively working and contributing to society. I assist in other ways around the house. There are other ways to pay, I guess.
That's a pretty good situation. I have to help around the house and work and pay rent.
Yeah, well, we can't all be that good. You know,
Well,
I'm the master of the deal.
yep, a king must have his castle.
A neat must have his nest.
Yes. And if you are a NEET living with your family, I would encourage you to view it like living with roommates. And if you want to keep your comfy situation, you need to be a good roommate and help out around the house and keep things tidy. And importantly, keep personally clean. There's a negative stereotype of NEETs with poor hygiene, and I can imagine that's not easy to live with.
It's just plain rude.
Yeah, it's rude.
I remember you and I lived together in a house in college,
Hmm.
and one of our roommates had one of her friends over, maybe more than friend over. I think they were more than friends, and one was nursing the other back to health and made some chicken soup.
Yeah, the chicken soup.
Oh my gosh, man. I Okay, I'm on the first floor, which is where the kitchen is. You're on the second floor.
Hmm.
That chicken soup, I swear to God, man, it sat there for a week. It never got refrigerated. They just put a lid on it and left it.
Oh my god, they didn't even put it in the fridge?
No, it never went to the fridge. It stayed on the burner where it was.
Wow.
And one of our other housemates finally decided to open it up and see what was in it. And she released the demon. Where, man?
Oh
That
my god.
smell immediately wafted into my. It was the most rotten, rancid thing I'd ever smelt in my life. And they were trying to make us clean it up, and it was like, "We're not gonna do that." Eventually, it got to the point where we just rubber banded the pot closed and threw it in the
Yeah,
garbage.
I remember that part.
Um, and then got very upset at our housemate and had to give them a talking to before, of course, the landlord gave them the final kibosh.
Right.
Yeah, stay
Yeah.
hygienic, stay considerate. Um, it's not comfy being around a bunch of people who are very upset with you.
I think now we can move on to the subjects of actually making money. In my opinion, the best way to make money is with your own personal hustles. And thanks to the fact that we live in the information age, there are many alternatives to making money. A very common hustle I've heard of is flipping items at a thrift store you find on Goodwill. Yeah, you'll find items you at a thrift store such as Goodwill, and then you'll sell them on eBay for more money. And as far as what specifically you sell, I'm not actually sure. I guess you just have to find out what's on demand on eBay and then sell it.
I mean, you even see, people who are trading up. They're doing up trades. There's that video on YouTube of the guy who's like, I started with a cup of sand from the beach and I now have a brand new car.
I've heard of that. I've definitely considered that, but never got around to actually starting anything like that.
It seems like a really interesting idea. Like go and pick up a seashell and just trade up until you eventually get something really
Very
nice.
interesting. So do you just like post on Craigslist, "Hey, I have this I don't know, paperclip and I want something better for it?"
I think you have to know how to work it, who's looking for what.
Interesting.
A lot of times people will trade something away just because of the hassle of getting rid of it. So a lot of times you can effectively trade up.
Yeah, and I might give that a shot just as Maybe less as a hustle and more as a social experiment. Just see how I can snowball something as, I don't know, worthless as a paperclip, and just see how far I can carry that. Could be interesting.
Like, you could probably trade from a paperclip to a pencil
Yeah.
sharpener.
And then a pencil sharpener to, I don't know, a ballpoint pen, and then a ballpoint pen into a stapler. See, for that, I would use Craigslist for that specific hustle, but there are lots of ways to hustle on the internet specifically. A couple of really common ones nowadays are Patreon and YouTube.
You didn't really mention as being a hustle earlier, but something that was kind of a cheap hobby was your saxophone. That's another way of passive income. Well, maybe not passive, it's actually pretty active income, but that's another way of making income.
Right, when I feel comfortable enough to go out and busk, I can make a few bucks doing that. You have to be good at that, and I've only been playing a few months. I don't think I'm quite at busking level, but yeah, that's absolutely a hustle you can do. And even if you're not busking, I have heard stories about panhandlers, about straight up beggars who make decent cash. There was a story I read about a guy who would leave his house every day dressed in business attire, a suit and tie and all that, and then on the way to quote unquote work, disguise himself as a homeless person and panhandle in front of a Walmart. And the only reason he was caught is because the IRS actually got him, and he wasn't reporting his panhandling money to the IRS.
Incredible.
Hustles though are like there are as many hustles as there are grains of sand on the beach. It's a super broad subject, and this definitely needs a future episode dedicated to it in order to cover more hustles in more detail.
So what you're suggesting are like more of your kind of active hustles. You know, you got your Patreons, your YouTubes, Twitch, things that require some degree of activity from yourself. But how about some of those passive hustles? You know, the that kind of high finance life, the people who gotta work the system a little bit that's in place. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I've definitely heard the term high finance a couple times. That's basically the act of this is something a lot of rich people do is they use their money to make more money in things like the stock market and real estate. Of all the different ways of making money, this is probably the most effective, due in part because there is something of a snowball effect. The more money you're pouring into successful financial pursuits, the more money you have to spend on financial pursuits. The problem with high finance, though, is that if you get started with a small amount of money, that progress can be very slow. You need a lot of money if you want to quickly start earning a living through high finance.
Right. I know a lot of my coworkers talk about strategies that they have to make additional money, be it just because they're unhappy with their wages or because, you know, more money is always nicer. I know one of those strategies is the stock market, for example.
The stock market is one of the real basic ones, honestly. It's you literally pay for a piece of a company, and whether the company fails or succeeds is kind of tied into your account. And the way you make money is either selling the stock at a higher price when the company becomes more valuable because they're making more money, or in the case of a dividend, the company is simply paying you a piece of the company's profits.
Right. And then there's other ones, other ways that people try to make passive income if they have maybe a little bit more on the side. Seems like the stock market's a little less engaged versus something like real estate, you know. People
Yeah.
people buying a house to rent out and then they just kind of snowball that into buying more houses to rent out.
Right. Real estate is interesting. That one seems very difficult to get into just because buying a house, it's a house. It costs a lot of money, but it also I might say it feels like you have something, if that makes sense. It's a bit difficult to explain, like, well, I own this stock. There's no physical product you own. But
It's very tactile.
yes, very tactile. That makes a lot of sense. There's a physical thing you can own that you can say is making you money. It might be a bit difficult to explain to people, like, how the stock market works. But with real estate, well, you have the flippers who will purchase a home and then pay a company to renovate the home, and then they sell the home at a higher price. Or the really common one is people purchase a home and then just rent it to someone else and collect the rent.
Right. I mean, we've encountered our fair share of people like that in our lives.
Sure, and I was when I was saying earlier that I was thinking of making the next big step in my NEET life, I was hoping to take that step and see if I could take out a home loan and buy a house, but not live in it.
Myself, I've been kind of trying to save up a fairly substantial sum of money and have had some success doing that since I don't have too many
Nice.
costs going out.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Unfortunately, we have the coastal tax here, so
Right.
everything is vastly inflated in price.
But that means you can charge higher rent.
Exactly. So once I do hit that threshold, I think I can start making a bunch of money. There was actually it was a really cool setup. It was 2 houses right next to each other that and
Cool.
both were getting sold.
Hmm.
They were both kinda small, so that's kind of how I was able to that's why they were so cheap. They got purchased in, like, a day,
Uh,
but I coulda bought one and rented the other one.
right. You live in one but rent the other one. That could work.
Yeah, and I was gonna do something like that.
Something my brother's been trying is something called a person-to-person loan,
What's that?
and it works very similarly to the way a bank loan works, where you literally just lend your money to someone else and collect a profit from the interest on that loan. And we were talking a little bit about it. There is always the risk that someone will default on the loan, but what he told me was that he does his research on the people beforehand. So one thing he'll look at is the career of the person he's loaning the money to. For instance, if the career is something like an engineer, that's probably a good indicator that they'll pay the loan back and he'll make the money back. And as far as I know, he's never had to deal with someone defaulting on their loan.
I mean, if you can pick your people right, you know, someone with good merits, yeah, easily make decent money off of it. I have a bit of a side note for this is not really related to making money. In fact, it's very much about spending money, but it's more spending it effectively.
Interesting.
For people who are coming out of college, this is especially applicable. I've heard of snowball payments on loans.
Mhm.
Effectively, each pay period, you have a specified amount that you put towards your loans, however many that you have.
Right.
You pick your smallest loan, and you basically you pay the interest on all the main loans. Shouldn't be that much
Uh-huh.
if you didn't let it get out of control. You at least pay a portion to the interest.
Right.
And then to the smallest loan, you throw all of your money into that. So you're
Mhm.
basically maintaining all your other ones while charging through your lowest one. And then you effectively snowball that into the second smallest and then the third smallest and so on and so forth until you
Hmm.
don't have any more loans. By the time you're on your biggest and final loan, you're able to throw like $600 at it at a time.
Okay, interesting. I think I see what you're talking about. I don't have very much college debt. I haven't gotten around to actually starting to pay it yet. I keep doing the payment deferral thing.
I actually paid off my college debt with that strategy.
Nice.
Another thing that we need to talk about with money, this is kind of high finance, but it's in essence against being a NEET, and it's investment plans through businesses.
Could we cover one last thing
Oh, yeah, sure.
that I just thought of?
Go ahead.
Crypto.
Oh, crypto. That's another it's kind of like the stock market in a kind of.
Yes, as far as I understand, it's very similar to the stock market, but there are alternative methods of obtaining crypto. And I don't really understand the technical part, but my brother also did this, but this endeavor didn't work out so well for him. And what he did was he essentially made these really powerful computers that would do math. And the act is called Bitcoin mining. And they would do a certain kind of math, and he would essentially gain free Bitcoin out of this. And what happened was he bought a bunch of graphics cards and then set all of this up, but then Bitcoin crashed super hard.
Isn't crypto mining something along the lines of like they skim like small bits of financial data out of every online transaction that occurs? And like that small bit of financial data is just lost typically.
Right. I'm not sure about the specifics of like why. I don't know about the specifics of why crypto itself is valuable. What I thought was going on was that your computer is essentially doing math in order to calculate the value of Bitcoin. It could be like that the product of these coins are backed by like information.
Ooh, that could be interesting. Maybe you're in some way selling sort of financial information or even more interesting like advertising information.
I think the different cryptos work differently, like they're valuable for different reasons. But the real popular one is Bitcoin. And while Bitcoin is very volatile, it's also the most quote unquote stable. Like if you buy Bitcoin low, there's a good chance you'll be selling it high at some point in the future.
We've seen it happen several times now. I'm sure people are seething about it, but Bitcoin takes a huge drop, but it always comes back.
My only problem with crypto is that, and this, I think this is why Bitcoin crashed super hard when my brother was doing it, was I took a look at it and I said to myself, all it's going to take for this stuff to become worthless is for governments to start outlawing it.
They started talking about regulating it, took a huge dump, pissed off a bunch of people, and then the government kind of dropped it.
Yeah, and I've heard whispers of governments talking again about it, about how like, oh, this can be used as let's see, criminals are using Bitcoin to pay for drugs and hitmen and all kinds of stuff. And I've heard whispers of that, but I don't think the government has pursued it very seriously.
I It's hard to say. They really are only interested if they can make money off of it.
Right.
Otherwise, it's not really that big
There's
of a
that
problem
too.
to them. But something I want to talk about
Yes, please continue.
is those kind of investment plans. And again, this is totally against like anything neat because it does involve you having to be at work. But investment plans that occur through work, things like your 401k or your simple IRAs, things like that. Those can lead to neatdom, but they take a really long time to do so. You got your 401k, which I think is it's linked to one of the markets. I think it's the Dow. That's why you see, all your boomer dads out there pulling their hair out when the Dow goes down because it's directly affecting their 401k. What I do with my business
Right.
is I have an IRA. I put 3% of my paycheck into it, and my business matches me 3%. This is all pre-tax, and it goes in there to, again, a company that will invest it for me. And when I finally decide to take it out, I get taxed on it, of course. And the rest of that is my money to use as I please. And it can lead to neatdom, but it takes a long time again.
See, my problem with the 401ks and Roth IRAs and all of that is just like you said, it takes such a long time to
Right.
build that up. We talked about the retired quote unquote NEET back in episode 0. If you're a NEET, but you're so old to actually enjoy all the time you get when you don't have to work, are you really a NEET?
Well, one thing I gotta think is being young as I am, I can afford something like this to be aggressive. There's always that one way that is consistent across the entire world to make money. You know what I'm talking about?
Yes. There is a distinct possibility that in order to become a NEET, you will have to get a job. Getting a job will certainly disqualify you as a NEET, but I'm not going to advise anyone to actually do this unless they have a plan, a strategy.
In a lot of cases, the job is unavoidable for a long time.
For most people, they're going to have to work a job if they absolutely cannot get their NEETbux any other way. And there's a couple of ways you could go about using your job to facilitate your NEETdom. My strategy is taking on a part-time job that will leave me enough time and energy to pursue my side hustles, and once my side hustles are profitable, I can simply quit my job and support myself on my side hustles. Of course, this does kind of hinge on if I can eventually support myself on side hustles, and I think that will probably take a while, but I don't mind working this part-time job for that long.
And I personally, my strategy is I've evaluated everything around me and come to the conclusion that I am going to have to work. I'm probably going to have to work at least until I'm 30, probably longer.
How old are you now?
24.
24. Okay. Right. Well, you're doing in your 20s what I should have done in my 20s, and now I'm spending my 30s trying to do that same thing. And in general, the strategy of getting a job is that the job itself will support you while you build this neat future of yours. And the more money you have when you finally launch into NEETdom, the better. You don't want to be always scraping by as a NEET. That's not going to be good for your mental health and probably not good for your physical health either. Of course, finances in general are a very broad and complicated concept, and this episode is meant to be an overview of several, but not necessarily every method of gaining your NEETbux. And in the future, I certainly want to discuss these different aspects of finance in greater detail.
Right. I mean, you have people who have their entire lives based around finance. Like, you have your financial geniuses. This is a very, very deep subject.
Oh,
It's
yes.
it's really hard to cover in a 30, 45-minute podcast.
I could very easily see 4 or maybe 5 episodes just on the subject of finances. But I think that's everything that we wanted to talk about tonight. For those of you out there, thanks for listening all the way through to the end. If you like what you heard, you can help us grow in a few ways. There will be many ways to support the NEETwork in the future, but right now the best way to help the show is to get the word out. Our podcast is available for download on Podbean, no longer on SoundCloud, in the link below, and will be available on a wide variety of platforms in the near future. If you're listening on YouTube, I'm sure you know what you can do to help out the YouTube algorithm and make sure other people get to see the NEETwork. And if you're interested in talking with other NEETs and aspiring NEETs, be sure to look at the NEETwork Discord, where all things NEET are discussed.
Still working on getting that up and running, but I'm hoping to have it done in the next couple of weeks.
Great. With that, I'd like to say good night and stay comfy.
Stay comfy.